Hello everyone, welcome to 19th Annual 5th International Science Fiction Conference 2020. The session is Portraiture of Women in Science Fiction Works, and I am the anchor, Indrani Gupta, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Maharaja Agrisane College, University of Delhi. Science fiction, predominantly a male-centered genre, inhabited by men and consumed primarily by male readers, has either excluded the very presence of women or female characters were merely confined to enact their proper roles in a textual discourse regulated by patriarchal conventions. Science fiction's presentation of women have often categorized them as alien or monstrous, either threatening the social order of men seen as equivalent to human, or rendered them as an object of sexual desire. In recent times, science fiction has sought to investigate the limits of patriarchal assumptions and perceptions by estranging the conceptualization of women from the male-centric suppositions of women being inferior to that of men and subsequently placed in a subordinated position. Science fiction, in its overlapping with feminist thought and feminist theoretical models, underscores what Marlene Brauer has said, the contrived nature of patriarchal reality. We hope this session will allow us and to be more informed about these portraitures and representations and images of women in science fiction works, and allows us to see through the ideology of, the sociocultural assumptions and understandings of gender by reading its intersections with class, caste, colonialism, post-colonialism, technologies, and its imbrication with material lived reality and mythology. The term intersections is borrowed from Jenny Wollmark's critical study, Alien and Others, Science Fiction, Feminism, and Postmodernism. Jenny suggests that intersections allows the slippage of values, crossover points where discourse becomes openly contradictory, boundaries become flexible and subject to renegotiation. It focuses on making critical examination of those everyday lived reality by defamiliarizing it, literalizing the absences, wherein the politics of representation of how women is constituted will be explained through the matrices of home, myths, body, and history of colonialism and globalization. So, the chairperson for this session is Professor KS Vaishali. Professor Vaishali is the professor at Department of Postgraduate and Doctoral Studies in English, Gyan Bharati, Bangalore University, Karnataka. In her 23 years of teaching career at Bangalore University, Professor Vaishali has taught several courses such as British Literature, Indian Literatures in English Translation, Contemporary Literary Theory, Gender Studies, Translation Studies, Cultural Studies, and so forth. She has played an important role in curricular development and syllabus design for undergraduate, postgraduate, and doctoral courses in English Studies. She has served as the chief editor of the English Textbook Committee for BA, BSc, and BCom courses of Bangalore University, and has inaugurated General English and optional English textbooks for BA and other courses of Bangalore University. She has successfully guided several students pursuing the doctoral programs in English Studies. Professor Vaishali is a bilingual writer in English and Kannada and has also established her credentials as a literary translator. Her book titled Prisoning Rhythms, a study of Margaret Atwood's poetry, explores the feminist theoretical underpinnings in the 10 poetry collections of the eminent Canadian poet and novelist Margaret Atwood. Professor Vaishali's Kannada translation, Padmaraga, a feminist utopian novella by the Bangladeshi feminist thinker Rokeya Sakawat Hussain, from the Penguin English translation into Kannada, has been published by Christ University Kannada Sangha. She is also the author of Metamorphic Journeys, Revisionist Myth-Making in Contemporary Feminist Utopian Fiction. Professor Vaishali has also authored an erudite introduction on the context of literary production by Kannada women writers down the centuries for the English translation of eminent Kannada writer Vedai's novella Vasudev's Family, published by Oxford University Press. She has published several articles on feminist literary criticism and gender issues in various journals and books in Kannada and English. Hima Vaishali's voluminous Kannada translation of Turkish Nobel laureate Orhan Pamuk's political thriller, Snow, has been published by Shrishti Publications recently and has won her critical acclaim in Kannada literary circles. Professor Vaishali has participated in numerous national and international conferences and seminars and presented papers on a wide range of issues in the area of English studies, gender studies, post-colonial theory, and literary translation. She has also been a resource person at several seminars, conferences, and refresher courses, and delivered keynote addresses and plenary talks at several national and international conferences. She has also participated in international conferences held in USA, UK, Thailand, etc. Professor Vaishali has delivered lectures at the University of Stevens Point and Marshfield, Wisconsin, USA in 2009. She has also participated in Millennium Kannada Cultural Conference held in Manchester, UK and Houston, USA. She presented a paper at the International Conference on Asian Women Intellectuals held in the Royal Chulalongkorn University, Bangkok, Thailand in September 2013 and gave a Hindustani classical music vocal recital at the invitation of Her Royal Highness Princess Maha Chakri Sindron of Thailand in Bangkok. Professor Vaishali is a freelance music columnist and has contributed over 92 articles on Hindustani classical music to the newspaper The Hindu. She is a performing Hindu classical vocalist and has given several classical musical recitals and lecture demonstrations in several cities in the country for culture organizations and universities in USA, Canada, UK, Singapore, and Thailand. Professor Vaishali is the recipient of the Karnataka State Rajyotsava Award for 2011 in Hindustani classical music. We welcome you, ma'am, and let's begin with the session. I will inform the presenters here and their profile. Our first presenter is Miss Kevin Morley. PS. She is currently pursuing her MPhil in English from Sri Sarada College for Women, Salem, Tamil Nadu, under the guidance of Dr. C.G. Sangeeta. She is a budding research scholar in the field of science fiction research, and she wishes to explore the relation between women and science. She reads the interface between literature and science as a bridge that connects women to initiate significant changes to society and to the lives of women. Her paper is titled Delineation of Optimistic Women in the Calculating Stars. The next presenter for this session is Ms. Nabanita Deka, who is currently working as an assistant professor in the Department of English, Maharaja Agrasen College, University of Delhi, and is pursuing her research in English from Jamia Millia Islamia. She has presented several papers at international and national conferences with numerous publications to her credit. She has also been a part of MHRD-sponsored Spark Course Research Project workshop in collaboration with the University of Witwatersrand, South Africa and Jamia Millia Islamia. Her specific areas of interest include Witwatersrand, South Africa, dystopian and science fiction, memory studies, diasporic studies, new literatures in English literary theory, Victorian, modern British and postmodern literature, Northeast literature, and Indian writings in English. Her paper is titled Breaking the Myth, Women as Superheroines and Supervillains in a Dystopian World. The next presenter for the session is Dr. Balaji Anandrao Navale. Dr. Balaji Anandrao Navale is presently Associate Professor and Research Supervisor and Head of the Department of English Language and Literature, MSP Mandal, Deogari College, Aurangabad, Maharashtra. He is an emerging, committed and passionate student of the field of science fiction, having qualified both state eligibility test and national eligibility test of the University Grants Commission. He began his career in academic field and worked as a teacher in Sri Shivaji College, Parbhani, MGM's College of Computer Science and Information Technology, Parbhani, and the School of Languages and Literature, SRTMU, Nanded, for a short period. He also worked in Maharashtra State Government's Rajaram College, Kolhapur, as a Maharashtra Public Service Commission recommended, selected, and sponsored full-time permanent senior lecturer in English. He has been recognized as a postgraduate teacher and research guide in the subject of English by Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, Marathwada University, Aurangabad. He is a life member of the Indian Association for Science Fiction Studies. With the award of Teacher Fellowship under FDP of UGC New Delhi, he completed his doctoral program on science fiction by women writers under the guidance of the critic Dr. Hariyar Kulkarni, sharing insights with science fiction writers and other critics. He holds membership of prestigious literary organizations both in India and abroad. He has presented papers in a few national and international seminars and conferences. A few critical books such as Science Fiction Voices of Women, published by Atlanta Publishers and Distributors, New Delhi, and the other book is Culture, Ideology and Hegemony in Literature, are to his credit. He has edited two books, Contours and Nuances of Research and Research Methodology, and Indian English Literature in the 20th Century. His forthcoming titles are Science Fiction Literary World in India, Eco-Literature, Exploration from the West and the East, A Student's Handbook of Science Fiction, and Science Fiction Criticism. His areas of special interest include, apart from science fiction, literary theories, translation, and wrestling. He is presently engaged in a postdoctoral program on images of women in science fiction, a comparative study from the West and the East. His next plan is to explore the world of Indian science fiction, particularly women's literature, eco-feminist fiction, feminist science fiction, postmodern fiction, women's writing, and world literature and sports literature. We welcome you, sir. His paper is titled Female Characters in Science Fiction, Archetypal Messengers in Social Equity and Equality. The next presenter for this session is Ms. Nidhi Mishra. Dr. Nidhi Mishra is Assistant Professor in the Department of English, Govind Sarang Government Law College, Bhattapara, Chhattisgarh. Her paper is titled Exploring the Gamut of African American Science Fiction. Welcome. The next presenter for this session is Ms. Smita Potnis. Ms. Smita Potnis is a science fiction writer. She is an MA with Marathi literature. She belongs to Mumbai, Maharashtra. Her science fiction stories and articles have been published in 5 books and in renowned Diwali magazines along with a few newspapers. She has contributed to creation including Shrutika for the program Vigyan Janahite as aired on Asmita channel. She has also written one-act play which was presented by Khalsa College for the Mavipa competition. Her paper is titled Portraiture of Women, Robots and Robotic Behavior in Marathi Science Fiction. Welcome. The next presenter for this session is Ms. Rajani Ravindra. Ms. Rajani Ravindra is a graduate student at Bangalore University pursuing her master's in English literature. Her interests include poetry writing, planning, and researching written work. Her paper is titled Sultana's Dream and its Conception of Feminist Utopia. Welcome. The next presenter is Ms. Shobha M. Dr. Shobha M. teaches at the Department of English, Bangalore University as Associate Professor. She was a recipient of the Canadian Commonwealth Scholarship from November 2000 to April 2002. Her areas of interest are Canadian literature, gender studies, cultural studies, and Indian literature. Her paper is titled A Journey Through the Forbidden Country, The Representation of Gender in Manjula Padmanabhan's The Island of Lost Girls. Welcome. Dr. Jyoti Venkatesh is the chairperson, Center for Global Languages, Bangalore City University. She is a multilingual specialist with more than 30 years of foreign language teaching experience. An alumnus of Bangalore University, she is the recipient of first PhD in French from Bangalore University. She has translated many well-known Kannada literary works into French. At present, she is translating works of Gyanpith awardees like Dr. Shivaram Karant and Dr. V.K. Gokak. She has co-authored 3 textbooks in French for students of undergraduate level. She is the recipient of Shrama Sadhana's Shining Star Award given by Bangalore Educational Trust in collaboration with PRCI and ISBR for her contributions towards French foreign language teaching. Her paper is titled Cyrano de Bergerac, Father of Science Fiction Literature in France, a Reflection. So we hope this session will be an illuminating and a fascinating one that will allow us to, provide, provide us insights on the interface of science fiction and gender, telling us how meaning and socio-political configurations is assigned to gender and its cultural imagism. Over to you, Dr. Vaishali, and all the very best present.
A warm greetings to everyone. I'm Kavin Muri from Tamil Nadu, India. I'm currently doing my MPhil in research under the guidance of Dr. C.G. Sangeeta, who is the Assistant Professor of English. The title of my research paper is Delineation of Optimistic Women in the Calculating Stars. The author I have chosen for this paper presentation is Mary Robinette Cowell. She was born on 1969 and she is currently living in Chicago. She is an American novelist, a puppeteer, and an art director. She was also the vice president of SFWA. She has won many awards like Hugo Award, Nebula Award, Locus Award, and John F. Campbell Award. Some of her important works are The Lady Astronaut of Mars, The Calculating Stars, and The Fated Sky. The theme I have chosen for this conference is the portrayal of women in science fiction. Science fiction is a genre in which creators can choose to represent a world that exists past concerns of the present world, where a woman no longer need a feminist project. The novelist Mary Robinette Cowell portrays women like superheroines who fulfill their dreams to become lady astronauts. The novel The Calculating Stars inspires women who are committed to hard work, propose to their passion, who love their failures, and so the success married them. The title of my research paper is Delineation of Optimistic Women in the Calculating Stars. The most important person in the novel is Dr. Elma Yark, who is the protagonist of this novel. She was the one who is striving to achieve her dreams. Some of her teammates are Nicole, Betty, Sabiha, Jasira, Miss Peaks, Miss Brax, Eugene, Martel, and Basira. These women are striving to achieve their dreams. The novel The Calculating Stars begins with a meteorite strike on the Earth, which results in climate change. This climate change brings an impact of global warming. And so, the scientists have decided to colonize the moon, which pave a way to female astronauts to save humanity. Space exploration. Space exploration is full of mysteries enriched with human fantasy. Curiosity, exploration, and unraveling the deepest puzzles are the core part to humankind. Although the possibilities of exploring space has excited people, it is not easy for a woman to cross the borders of a stratospheric layer. Characterization of Cowell. The most important person is Yelma Yak, who is the protagonist of this novel. She is a physicist, a human computer, a mathematician, and a vast pilot who works in NASA. As the former President of India, Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, rightly said, space research has had a major focus on making things work and bringing the dreams of mankind to fruition through technologies that mankind can be proud of. It is almost a green technology. The entire novel revolves around racism and sexism. As the first black administrator of NASA, Charles Bolden rightly said, the systematic problem with racism in the United States is not something that started this year or last year or 10 years ago. This is what our nation was founded on. The first woman who crossed the stratospheric layer is Valentina Ladmirovna Teshoko. She spent 3 days in space and orbited the Earth 48 times. She was a cosmonaut and an engineer. She was the first youngest woman to flown into space. She was the one who made the revolution on sex barrier on June 16, 1963. She spent 3 days in space. She was the only woman who have been on a space mission. The protagonist of the novel, Elma Yar, undergoes several physical and psychological struggles. She was so strong to change the public opinion about women and their ability to become women astronauts. Her struggle to achieve her dreams, in spite of her anxiety and panic attacks, creates an empowering relationship with her teammates too. Elma, who was a trailblazing and inspiring character, pushes herself to realize her dream to become female astronaut. A woman has to undergo a lot of training to become a female astronaut. She has to undergo basic space shuttle training at International Space Station. She should also have medical fitness. She should have good public speaking skills and undergo several training and be able to operate robotics. And some of the important trainings are spacewalking, operating the space station, and she should be able to handle the jet planes. Cowell's depiction of women in the novel The Calculating Stars. She gives a personal view of global catastrophe and humanity's efforts to survive. She gives a positive and inspiring characterization. She delicately handles the characters. The novel is about historical fight for equality. It addresses the rampant racism and anti-Semitism and prejudice. The novel The Calculating Stars gives value and dignity to women, thus making them a successful female astronaut. Colonization of Moon. Thus, Elma Yagh and her friends achieved their dreams. She was an inspiring character in the novel who colonized the moon. In future, humans may live and work on the moon. Energy like Elma Yagh will make it possible to travel and live on the lunar surface. The protagonists make a striving effort to save humanity. Humans must choose the appropriate energy source and technological means to produce power. I would like to conclude with a quote of Nora Ephron, the American journalist and writer. Above all, be the heroine of your life, not the victim. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I am Ms. Napanita Dekam, working as an assistant professor in the Department of English, Maharaja Agro Singh College, University of Delhi. I deem it my honor to be presenting my paper at the International Science Fiction Conference 2020. So, my paper is titled Breaking the Myth: Women as Superheroines and Supervillains in a Dystopian World. When science fiction established itself as a literary genre in the 19th century, women were treated as second class citizens, both legally as well as socially. This then spilled over to the literary world as well, for the male science fiction writers accorded women the same status of second class citizens in their writings, in spite of the genre's claim to be bold, modern, and revolutionary in its approach. The writings thus were androcentric, with man as the, I quote, main line of evolution, and with a female satellite revolving around him as the moon revolves around the earth, unquote. However, in the contemporary context, in a world driven by the powerful forces of irrationalism and bigotry, where sexual subordination is still a reality, science fiction stories offers a space of alternative reality. The patriarchal society has imposed fixed identities and image of women. For a female writer, then, the space of alternative reality of science fiction stories serves as an able erotic tool to explore the notions of gynocentric identity. Reconnoitering this idea further, the paper seeks to puncture the conventional idea of a woman vis-a-vis the analysis of the protagonist and antagonist of Lakshmi Hariharan's novel The Many Lives of Ruby Iyer, who are both women. In doing this, the paper will expose gender roles as social constructs by examining the character of Ruby as a hero or a superheroine. Finally, it will dwell on the socio-political use of science and technology vis-a-vis the alternative methods of reproduction, ultimately leading to a dystopian world. When Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was first published in 1818, it heralded a new age whereby men could interfere with the workings of nature. The novel thus inaugurated the genre of science fiction. However, although the novel became commercially successful, there were no immediate women writers who forayed into the world of science fiction except for a handful in the 19th century. It was only from 1920s that women writers like Claire W. Harris, Frances Stevens, C.L. Moore, Leigh Brackett, and a few others marked their profound presence in the world of science fiction. It is in this context, thereby, it is important to examine and explore gynocentric identity. Darko Suvin defines science fiction as a literary genre, and I quote, whose necessary and sufficient conditions are the presence and interaction of estrangement and cognition, and whose main formal device is an imaginative framework alternative to the author's empirical environment, unquote. Science fiction allows a space of alternative reality, as Suvin says, whereby key social, cultural, and political issues can be discussed and examined. The genre thus is an able heuristic tool to explore gynocentric identity. Ursula Le Guin, in her essay Is Gender Necessary?, defines science fiction story as a heuristic device, a thought experiment where heuristic simply means serving, and I quote, serving to discover or find out. If this be the case, then certainly science fiction stories are able heuristic tools whereby exploration of gynocentric identity can be done through exploration of characters. In this context, then, science fiction allows women writers the space to question the hegemonical patriarchal practices, explore further women's identity, and destabilize the existing status quo. The patriarchal society has imposed a fixed idea and image of women, such as women as goddesses, witches, homemakers, sexual objects, childbearers, and so on. A woman, as per patriarchal standards, should be homely, and any woman expressing anger and aspirations are dismissed as aggressive and unladylike. There has been then a systematic ostracization of women, and they have been reduced to the, and I quote Yuval Davis here, who says that women have been reduced to the marginal metrics of citizenship. Women are seen as the custodians of culture upon whom the family's honor and ideal image of a nation rests. Narrating a personal incident in her essay, We Should All Be Feminists, Chimamanda Adichie talks about the time when in her primary school in Nasuka, Adichie was denied the right to be the class monitor because she was a girl. She writes, and I quote, if we do something over and over again, it becomes normal. If only boys are made class monitor, then at some point we will all think, even if unconsciously, that the class monitor has to be a boy. If we keep seeing only men as heads of corporations, it starts to seem natural that only men should be heads of corporations, unquote. It is this institutionalized normative structure that needs to be destabilized, re-examined, and restructured. Lakshmi Hariharan's novel The Many Lives of Ruby Iyer debunks the idea of an ideal woman set by the patriarchal society, and in fact we see in this novel women seizing power from men. In the novel we come across two powerful women characters who are ambitious, aggressive, bold, and independent, qualities that are certainly abominable by patriarchal standards. The story revolves around 18-year-old Ruby, whose life takes a drastic turn when she is shoved off a train in the bustling city of Bombay by a male. She survives the accident and now has to rescue her best friend Pankaj and save the city from a megalomaniac despot, a woman called Dr. Braganza, who is also Ruby's mother. Interestingly, Ruby acquires superpowers after the accident, and in her we see a new woman who will not stand back and instead will, and I quote, take things into her own hands, unquote. The daily struggles of a woman, the rampant sexual harassment is vividly highlighted in the book. Her superhuman powers, characterized by immense powerful strength, now enables her to beat up perverts, save people, and the city. Ruby now has every reason to unleash the beast inside her to fight for justice. If Ruby, epitomizes a perfect superheroine or a hero, then in Dr. Briganza we have the perfect supervillain. Dr. Briganza has raised a powerful kiddie army consisting of boys and girls in the age group of 13 and 25. What is more terrifying is the fact that with the help of science, she has invented a drug called euthanasia, which enables her to mentally control her creations, thereby inciting them to kill their parents and wreak havoc in the city. Having lost her son in 2611 Mumbai attacks, Dr. Briganza wants to populate the world with fresh blood. The novel, The Many Lives of Ruby Ayer, then breaks the stereotypical image of women as mere companions. In both Ruby, the superheroine, and in Dr. Briganza, the supervillain, we see two powerful women trying to create their own path and explore further their real identity. The very idea and image of an ideal woman as set with a patriarchal society is debunked, for we see two ambitious and independent women trying to fulfill their dream. Here we see not the invisible woman but a Wonder Woman who saves the city from a supervillain. If one has turned evil in her desire for power, it is also another woman who acts as the savior. In this context, then, science fiction has allowed a space whereby women can exercise their freedom. The male characters, Vishal, Vikram, and Pankaj, instead remain as sidekicks throughout the novel. It is the women characters then who are the real change makers in the novel. Dr. Briganza's sole intention in raising the army is to rear them up as her own children. Using euthanasia, she has very conveniently altered the methods of reproduction to have children. She does not need men anymore to have children. She has systematically altered the very concept of having children. She has thus become a self producing woman, a mother of many children without the traditional help of men. And in doing this, she has radically altered society and redefined women's role in it. However, in her exploration of redefining women's role, Dr. Briganza ultimately creates a dystopic situation, one that is marked by death, chaos, and destruction. In her quest to create a new tomorrow, she has razed to ground the very same city that she desires to save. Her desire to create an ideal utopian society then, and I quote, is riddled with a totalitarian perspective, unquote, ultimately leading to a dystopian performance of its utopian promise. Technology comes to her rescue, for it is through information available on the internet that she is able to destroy the city. In this crazy dystopic times, then, Ruby emerges as the only ray of hope. It is her superhuman strength, the power that she draws from her lightning tree mark on her back, that enables her to stand up to a supervillain like Dr. Briganza. The idea that only men is or can be the savior and superhero is thereby debunked in this novel. The novel, the novel then not only dwells on issues of modernity, scientific knowledge, proliferation of science and technology for personal interest and its impact on human race, but also exposes gender roles as social construction. The novel highlights that our understanding of science is dependent on our society's gender expectations, thereby leading us to question the very idea of biological determinism. In this context, then, it becomes imperative to explore gynocentric identity, and the heuristic medium of science fiction thus helps in this exploration of gynocentric identity to enable women find their real identity. The space of alternative reality provided by science fiction thus helps women science fiction writers like Lakshmi Hariharan to break the myth dismantle the imposed identities, shed all inhibitions related to the typical image of women, and help realize women their real identity and potentiality. In the superheroine Ruby and supervillain Dr. Briganza, then, we find two very contemporary women who have outgrown the traditional feminine roles. Thank you so much.
Honorable Chairperson, all the stakeholders of the said international conference, and my dear friends, a very good afternoon to all of you. My name is Dr. Balaji Anandrao Navle. Presently, I have been working as Professor and Head, Department of English Language and Literature, Devgiri College, Aurangabad, Maharashtra State. The title of my paper is Female Characters in Science Fiction, Archetypal Messengers of Social Equity and Equality. I have deliberately selected this topic when we explore the history of science fiction. At that time, we come to the point of view of discrimination, as rightly stated by Virginia Woolf in her groundbreaking critical essay, Shakespeare's Sister, where we rarely find the counterpart or beloved sister of William Shakespeare. Moreover, the modern Joyce, James Joyce rightly states that what is history? It is not only her history, but history is a nightmare from which I am trying to awake. So a justice will be given through the vices of what is known as presented by women. So the present paper explores and examines female characters and their roles both in life and literature. See the very famous diagram means the history of science fiction, like the observation of this picture, is somehow explored, examined, analyzed, and critically appreciated from one perspective. And mono perspective, patriarchal perspective, is full of ideologies, politics, discrimination, and whatnot. So, in order to give justice to the vices, vital vices of women, one need critical perspective, critical analysis, critical understanding. Then and then one may understand the politics associated with the characters of women as rightly fictionalized in science fiction. When we explore the history of science fiction, one can understand it is full of injustice, it is full of politics. What is surprising about the genre of science fiction is that traditionally it has been considered a male-centered literature meant for phallocentric values. And we have to understand and explore these kind of phallocentric values. Owing to sexual textual politics, there is sexual and textual politics associated with science fiction. Owing to sexual textual politics, by women, science fiction by women has somehow remained outside the domain of critical scrutiny. Viewed the tradition of science fiction from the women's point of view, one understands that in spite of rich contribution of women writers, this kind of genre of science fiction still suffers the malady of phallocentric subsumption. Actually, women have been a part of science fiction since its beginning, and the seminal science fiction Frankenstein, though written by a well-known woman, Mary Shelley, but the role of women until recent times was relatively minor one, barring a few exceptions. Science fiction in the hands of women has even transcended the shorelines of feminism and sci-fi, fictionalized life not merely from women's perspective, but from a human perspective based on scientific conscience. Women writers have not only subverted the sci-fi form and its convention for their own ends, but they have also contributed a specifically female voice to a seemingly male jar. So we have to understand this kind of politics. One well-known critic, Betty King, rightly describes the condition of science fiction book with a woman character. See the words. Generally speaking, if a science fiction book was widely read, it had either no woman character or women in only minor one, at best secondary character roles. If a science fiction book had a woman main character, it was not widely read, or at least did not remain popular into our own time. Moreover, a well-known critic like Louis Berinko very aptly unveils the politics in literary history. He rightly comments, literary history is a matter of power, not justice. What is commonly called literary history is actually a record of choices, which writers have survived their time and which have not, depends upon who notices them and choose to record the notice. Which works have become part of the canon of literature, read, thought about, discussed, and which have disappeared depends in the same way on the process of selection and power to select. In this way, there is sexual and textual politics in science fiction, and the very seminal novel, that is Frankenstein, is no more exception of it. Images and characters of women in science fiction is full of sexual politics, gender discrimination, and stereotyped ideologies. The issue of character and images of women remain quite crucial right from the seminal science fiction, that is Frankenstein. Sexual tension move throughout the book, that is presented in the key sentence, I shall be with you on your wedding night. As a departure from Gothic practice, the novel Frankenstein contains few female characters that held only secondary or minor character roles. They are Mrs. Margaret Saville, Justine Mortis, and Elizabeth Lavenza. Margaret, never to write or speak in the book, is the sister of the narrator. She is the person to whom Captain Robert Walton writes letters in the book, the person to whom he tells the story. Justine, a servant in the Frankenstein household, is introduced briefly after being wrongly accused of killing young William Frankenstein, in fact a crime belonging to the monster, but for which she is found guilty and executed. Elizabeth Lavenza holds the mirror female role in the book as Victor Frankenstein's stepsister and betrothed. It is she who briefly brightens his guilt-ridden life, who marries him because she loves him, and who also killed by the monster in his act of revenge against his creation. So the game of who is culprit and who is being victimized is well presented in Frankenstein. But throughout the book, she also remains distant and cold, barring a few exceptions. In the novel, the women are either passive receivers of the information or killed in enlarged Victor Frankenstein's horror as his own creation. In the latter cases, the two women in their secondary character roles are used as mere tools to increase the impact of the story. The horror caused by the creation is certainly deeply dramatized by the killing of the innocent, helpless women who were so closely to Victor's heart. On the other hand, the male characters passionately seek knowledge. This quest means everything to Frankenstein and Walton. They are never disabused. Frankenstein indeed praises the vows of discovery as an honorable and courageous undertaking, even as the creature's hands are about to close round his throat. The constant litigation which takes place in the background represents another kind of quest for knowledge, often erroneous or perverted. Likewise, the landmark in the history of science fiction is Ursula K. Le Guin. She purposefully and very wittily fictionalized the images and characters of women in her groundbreaking work like The Left Hand of Darkness, The World for World is Forest, the dispossessed and ambiguous utopia. In fact, in the work, the word for world is forest. There is a brutal rape of a woman on because of the problem created by others. And even in Left Hand of Darkness, Ursula K. Le Guin purposefully provides a perfect antidote and panacea to sexism, that is, the discrimination on the basis of sexes. And the key sentence explains everything, that is, the king becomes pregnant. The war is avoided only because of this scientific thought experimented change. The king becomes pregnant. So is the innovative thinking, preaching and practicing brought by Ursula K. Le Guin in the field of science fiction. But the real picture, iconoclast, is presented by Octavia Butler. There is a topsy-turvydom of the characters of women as effectively fictionalized by Octavia Butler. Octavia Butler has black women as protagonists, but it is also important that there are always number of black characters in her novels. There is enough of a critical mass of racial and sexual and cultural diversity in any Butler novel to make radiant in practicing science fiction writer. The groundbreaking work such as Kindred is worth considerable, and the heroine Dana is very, very important. Along with the central character, all the black character moves around her and they are very normal. They somehow bear the atrocities and easily overcome the atrocities with the help of scientific technology, scientific perspective, scientific thinking, scientific invention can be a probable and practical antidote to the atrocities against women, as rightly pointed out by Octavia Butler. When we have a comparative study of male and female characters, one can easily understand that the so-called white male characters in the novel, who seem very, very odd, isolated, pathetic, alien, problematic, and abnormal. Women characters are always normal in odd situation. On the other hand, even in a positive situation, the overall behavior of the so-called white and great people, male character, becomes abnormal. This is the point very effectively explored by the witty writer Octavia Butler. So in this way, Butler transcends the shorelines of not only science fiction, but presented positive character of women. That is a kind of revolution. When we analyze the whole history of science fiction with a comparative perspective, one comes to the conclusion that science fiction reflected in male tradition explores and exploits science as a mode of power, domination, destruction, and violence. Women, on the contrary, pursue the scientific truth as the means of reconstructing human society in positive terms regarding constructive change, growth, and all-round sound development unto the last. The space of dominance and violence of men's science fiction is replaced by women science fiction writers with space for harmony, coordination, and humanness. They have been using science fiction as a tool for reformation. And this is the contribution given by women writers. When we explore Indian scenario, at that time one easily realizes that the work by the edited work, in fact, by Bala Phondke, entitled as It Happened Tomorrow, a very famous work known by every reader of science fiction, published by National Book Trust, is a landmark in the growth and development of Indian science fiction, where he presented a true criticism with the narrative technique of thought experimentation, a thematic technique of thought experimentation, and the role of women along with the men become very, very crucial, and that is very, very apt. Thank you very much.
Greetings to everyone. The topic of my paper presentation is exploring the gamut of African American women's science fiction. Coronavirus pandemic has renewed our interest in science fiction. People are reading various literature related to epidemics, pandemic, apocalyptic, post-apocalyptic fiction to know the outcomes of such stories. African American women writers have contributed significantly to this genre of literature. Their works include concept of crisis, freedom, and future in their works, which is uncannily timely in this present situation. The genre of science fiction is confluence of principles of art and science. Basically, science fiction is a type of literature where scientific principles are applied. According to John W. Campbell, science fiction should be regarded as a literary medium akin to science itself. Scientific methodology involves the proposition that a well-considered theory will not only explain away known phenomena but also predict new and still undiscovered phenomena. Science fiction tries to do much the same and write up in the story form what the result looks like when applied not only to machine but human society as well. Magic, fairy tales, scientific themes have been present in literature right from its advent. There has been some stories in Arabian Nights which have magic themes. Similarly, Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travel is another work which deals with distant land travel theme. However, it is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, written in 1818, that is considered as first work of literature in science fiction. After 8 years, she published her another work, The Last Man, which was first apocalyptic fiction. Then there has been seminal works of Edgar Allan Poe's The Unparalleled Adventure of One Hans Pfeiffer, H.G. Wells' Time Machine, The Island of Dr. Moreau, The Invisible Man, Jules Verne's Journey to the Center of the Earth, Voyages Extraordinaires, which has firmly established the genre of science fiction. One of the early works of black science fiction is that of Martin Delany. Delany published Blake in 1859, which is an example of a colored utopian fiction. Charles Chestnut often wrote about folkloric hoodoo stories in The Conjure Woman. Then there is W.B. Du Bois' story, The Comet, which is considered as first apocalyptic fiction by a colored person. The genre of African American women speculative fiction and science fiction developed as an outright rejection of whiteness and maleness. These women writers have revolted against the set standards of white males. They conveniently shattered all the set norms of a genre dominated by white males. These women writers have brought a whole new context of realism and humanism in the science fiction genre, for they were writing about not only themselves but also about their own black community experience. The stories that these African American women writers are not mere fantasy, but it is an outcome of their own experience and belief. Nilo Hopkinson points out in this regards, these do not make for a thrilling adventure story, it is a non-fiction. Now, when we are studying African American women science fiction, the name of Octavia Butler should never be forgotten. Butler is credited for blending of feminist science fiction and black fiction. Butler's most famous novel is Kindred, written in 1979. Her works are a revolt against typical interplanetary plots, white male hegemony, revisiting her past, quest of selfhood, and envisioning a new future. Butler's other famous works are Dawn, Parable of Sower, and Fledgling. Some other major African American women writers here I want to point out is Tenerife Dew, which bases her science fiction works on history and traditions. Her most famous works are My Soul to Keep and The Between. Then Nilo Hopkinson is another seminal, scintillating writer. She draws inspiration from her Caribbean roots and traditions of folklore and storytelling. Her most famous works are The Brown Girl in the Ring, Midnight Robber, and The Salt Roads. Nandi Okorafor is known for her works in fantasy and magic realism. Okorafor explores the question of identity and culture in her works. Her most notable works are Lagoon and Who Fears Death. Now, when we are talking about African American science fiction, we must know the term Afrofuturism. The term Afrofuturism was first coined by cultural critic Mark Derry in the decade of 1990s. Derry, in his edited collection Flame Wars, the discourse of cyber culture, defines Afrofuturism as speculative fiction that treats African American themes and addresses African American concerns in the context of 20th century technoculture and more generally African American signification that appropriates images of technology and prosthetically enhanced future. This is to say that Afrofuturism may be called a subgenre of science fiction, but in a layer aesthetic mode that encompasses a diverse range of artists working in different genres of media who are united by their shared interest in projecting black futures derived from Afro-diasporic experience. Now, some of the themes of Afrofuturism are reclamation, liberation, and colored envisioned future. African American people have always felt that they have been left out purposely in civilization's technological advancement. Owing to their race and color, they were not considered fit for technology. Technology and science has always been dominated by white males. This domination of whiteness has led to technological inequality. Afrofuturism revolts against this persistent digital divide and tech inequities that exist between black and whites. African American women writers of science fiction has come of an age. The 20th century and 21st century African American women writers are constantly expanding their horizons. The gamut of their works include those themes which were once unimaginable in the past, conventional themes of folklore, myths, fairy tales to contemporary themes of cyberpunk, pulp fiction. Pop culture is being explored. While rejecting patriarchy and neo-colonialism, African American writers have boldly rewrote the genre of science fiction. Thank you.
नमस्कार. माझाचा विषय आहे मराठी विज्ञान कथेतील स्त्री प्रतिमा, रोबोट आणि यांत्रिकता. 19व्या ॲन्युअल आणि 5व्या इंटरनॅशनल सायन्स फिक्शन कॉन्फरन्स 2020 मध्ये उपस्थित सगळ्या मान्यवरांना नमस्कार. आजच्या विषयातील रोबोट म्हटलं तर नेहमी रोबोटबाबत होणारा उहापोह म्हणजे मानवावर येऊ घालणारं बेकारीचं संकट वा अलेक्सा, सिरी किंवा आपल्या रोजच्या वापरातले मोबाईल्स, अँड्रॉइड यामुळे आपली नष्ट होणारी गोपनीयता हा नाही. या उल्लेखलेल्या विषयात रोबोटची सरशी होतेच आहे, पण रोबोट भावनारोपित केल्याने मानवी झाला आणि जर त्याचा प्रवेश नातेसंबंधात व्हायला लागला तर नेमकं काय हा आहे. स्त्री प्रतिमा म्हणजे स्त्रीची भावना, तिचं वागणं, स्त्रीमन, नातेसंबंध जोडणं आणि नाती जपणं हे अतिशय कोमलपणे करणारं स्त्रीचं मन. ते मन मात्र पुरुषाचंही असू शकतं. पितृत्वाच्या भावना या मातृत्वाच्या भावनेपेक्षा वेगळ्या नसतात, पण आपण मुख्यत्वे विज्ञान कथेतील स्त्री आणि रोबोट यांच्याबाबत विचार करणार आहोत. स्त्री ही प्रसंगी कणखर आणि कठोरही होती, त्याही बाबत रोबोटचं वागणं अशा सगळ्याशी तुलना. यात स्त्रीच्या नैसर्गिक भावना आणि मानवाने रोबोटमध्ये रोपित केलेल्या कृत्रिम भावना या दोन्हीची तुलना करायची आहे. माणसाने त्याच्यातली नैसर्गिकता हरवू देऊ नये. माणूस रोबोट निर्मिती करताना त्याला आपल्यासारखं बनवतो. कुठेतरी कधीतरी ते नैसर्गिकतेवर मात करू शकतं, जे योग्य की अयोग्य. मानवावर मात मानव निर्मित रोबोट करणार का? ते योग्य असेल का? भावना रोपित करण्यापूर्वी असणारा रोबोट बघितला तर त्यात मानवाचं श्रेष्ठत्व दिसून येतं, पण भावना रोपित केल्यावर रोबोट आणि मानव यात रोबोट मानवावर मात करू शकतो. तेव्हा पुढे खरोखरच असं युग येईल का ज्याला राईज ऑफ रोबोट्स म्हटलं जाईल? कथा म्हणजे जीवनाचं प्रतिबिंब आणि विज्ञान कथा म्हणजे भविष्यातील जीवनाचं प्रतिबिंब. विज्ञान कथेची व्याख्या म्हटली तर एक नाही, तर त्याचं सार असं आहे की आजच्या विज्ञानाच्या सत्य संकल्पनेचे भविष्यातील समाज जीवनावर, माणसांवर, त्यांच्या नात्यांवर काय परिणाम होतील हे पाहणारी कथा म्हणजे विज्ञान कथा. आपण स्त्रीशी संलग्न नातेबंध आणि रोबोट यावर आधारित तुलना करणार आहोत. याचं कारण आहे की विज्ञान कथा ही मुळात माणसांची कथा असते, त्यांच्या नातेबंधांवरची कथा असते. त्या भविष्यातील माणसांच्या नात्यांवर, माणसांच्या जीवनावर होणारा विज्ञान संकल्पनेचा परिणाम दाखवलेला असतो आणि आपल्याला या परिणामातून भविष्यातील स्त्रीमध्ये यांत्रिकता येणं संभवतं का व रोबोट हे अधिक मानवी होतील का हे बघायचं आहे. नाती कितीही कोणतीही असोत, स्त्री म्हटलं की आपल्यासमोर नातं येतं ते आईचं. याचं कारणही आहे की मूल जन्माला येतं तेव्हा त्याचं नातं पहिलं जुळतं ते आईशी. कोणा स्त्रीला बाळाला जन्म द्यायला वाढवायला वेळ नाही म्हणून तिच्या बाहेर तयार केलेल्या गर्भांकुराला कृत्रिम गर्भाशयातून जन्म दिला गेला आणि त्या बाळाला रोबोटने वाढवला. तो रोबोट भावनारोपित केलेला असल्याने त्याला वाटलेल्या बाळाविषयीच्या ममत्वामुळे त्याने जर बाळावर अधिकार दर्शवला तर बाळाची आई म्हणून कोणाला सुपूर्द केलं जाईल, कोणाला मानवी म्हणता येईल, यांत्रिकता कोणात अधिक असेल. तसं तर आपण म्हणतो की आपल्या नैसर्गिक मानवी मेंदूशी स्पर्धा ही फार कठीण गोष्ट आहे, पण तेव्हाच आपल्याला अजून मेंदूविषयी पूर्ण माहिती नाही ही गोष्टही तितकीच सत्य आहे आणि त्यामुळेच कदाचित आपण आपल्या पूर्ण मेंदूचा वापर करण्यास सक्षम नाही. आणि त्या तुलनेत बघितल्यास मानवी होत असलेल्या रोबोटमधली प्रगती मानवावर मात करणारी असेल का हा प्रश्न पडतो. आणि यातून रोबोटचं मानवीकरण आणि मानवात रोपित केलेली जाणारी चीप तसंच वैज्ञानिकांकडून नॅनोबोट्स मेंदूत रोपित केल्यास आपला मेंदू सुपर ब्रेन होईल असं सांगणं, हे सगळं नेमकं कुठं चाललंय? ही नक्की प्रगती आहे का? यंत्रमानव हे मानवनिर्मित आता मानवी दिसावेत असावेत हा माणसाचा प्रयत्न. मानव निसर्गाचा खेळ त्याच्याकडे बघत बघत शिकत असतो आणि तसं वागून त्याच्यावर कुरघोडी करायचा प्रयत्न करत असतो. आपल्यासारखा रोबोट करताना तेही आपल्यावर कुरघोडी करणार नाहीत ना हा विचार त्याच्या मनात येत नाही का? शेवटी रोबोटही माणसांनी तयार केलेले तर माणसांसारखेच असणार. काम करण्यात यंत्रमानवाची गती मानवापेक्षा अधिक असते हे निर्विवाद आहे. पण आपण विचार करणार आहोत ते यंत्रमानवात भावना रोपित केल्यावर त्याच्यात जागृत झालेलं मानवीपण आणि मानवात विविध कारणांमुळे कोरड्या होणाऱ्या भावना. मग त्याचं कारण आयुष्यातली तडजोड असो वा आयुष्यातला ताणतणाव, व्यवहार, आयुष्यातली अस्थिरता, रुटीन आयुष्य, हे काहीही. पण त्यामुळे भावना आटतात का? माणूस वृक्ष होत जाईल का? माणसातली माणुसकी कमी होत जाईल का? तो यांत्रिक होईल का? यांत्रिकता हा स्थायीभाव तर होणार नाही ना त्याच्या आयुष्यातला. या सगळ्याचा परिणाम मानवी नातेसंबंधांवर कसा होईल? त्यात यंत्रमानव सरशी करतील की मानव सावरेल? यांत्रिकता म्हणजे नेमकं काय? यांत्रिकता म्हणजे यंत्रवत होणं. जीवनात यांत्रिकता येणं त्याआधी हे बघायला हवं की माणूस म्हणजे नेमकं काय. माणूस म्हणजे जीव, एक प्राणीच. पण मग इतर प्राणीमात्रांपेक्षा तो वेगळा कसा ठरतो? त्याच्यात असलेली बुद्धिमत्ता, संवेदनशीलता, दुसऱ्याला समजून घेण्याची, समजण्याची शक्ती, माणुसकी, त्याच्या भावना, संयम. कोणतीही गोष्ट करताना त्यात अनुभवही घेताना भावना निर्माण होत नसतील तर मात्र आयुष्य यंत्रवत होतं. माणसांची मनं, वागणूक यंत्रवत होऊ शकतात. एखाद्या चक्रात चालत असलेलं भावनाहीन माणुसकी नसलेलं आयुष्य यंत्रवतच असतं. बरोबरच्या कोणाचाही माणूस म्हणून विचार होत नसेल तर त्या माणसात आणि यंत्रात काय फरक राहिला? तर दुसरीकडे रोबोटमध्ये भावना रोपित व्हायला लागलेल्या आहेत. रोबोटनी माणसांसारखं आपलं आपण शिकावं असा प्रयत्न आहे. माणूस रोबोटसारखा यांत्रिक आणि रोबोट माणसांसारखा मानवी होणार का? ते नेमकं कसं असेल? त्यासाठी आपण मराठी विज्ञान कथातून आलेल्या स्त्री प्रतिमा, रोबोट आणि मानवात आलेली यांत्रिकता की रोबोटमधली गेलेली यांत्रिकता हे बघणार आहोत. लक्ष्मण लोंढे सरांच्या त्यांच्या निर्णय या कथेत तात्यांची पत्नी पार्वती ही नवऱ्याच्या आज्ञेत राहणारी, पार्वतीच्या मृत्यूनंतर मुलगा पार्वतीसारखा दिसणारा स्त्रीरूपी रोबोट आणून देतो. रोबोट तात्यांच्या सगळ्या आज्ञा पाळते, पण तरी ती खरी पार्वती होऊ शकत नाही. का? कारण खरी पार्वती तात्यांच्या मनाप्रमाणे वागता नाही. ती त्यांची आज्ञा त्यांच्या चांगल्यासाठी न बोलता डावलायचीही. त्यांना साखर खायची नाही तर त्यांनी कितीही सांगितलं तरी चहात साखर ती घालायची नाही. पण रोबोट तसं करेल का? कामगार आणि रोबोट यात रोबोट अर्थातच विजयी ठरत असले तरी घरच्या कौटुंबिक पातळीवर मात्र मानव अजिंक्य होता. का? तर माणसाचा व माणसावाचून अडत होतं. माणसातली भावना, माणसातील माणुसकी या गुणांमुळे आणि रोबोटमध्ये ते नसल्याने या पातळीवर रोबोटचं स्थान तसं नगण्य होतं. हळूहळू विज्ञानात जशी प्रगती होत चालली तसे त्याचे पडसाद म्हणून कथेतही वेगळेपण यायला लागलं. काही कथातून रोबोट विचार करून घरात कामं करतील असे बनवण्यात आलेले दाखवले गेले. त्यावेळी माणसात राहून रोबोटच्या डोक्यात तुलनात्मक विचार आले असं जेव्हा दाखवलं गेलं, तेव्हा हळूहळू माणूस आणि रोबोट या तुलनेत रोबोटकडे वाचकाची सहानुभूती जायला लागली. तो रोबोट आहे तरी तो माणुसकीने असा विचार करतो आणि माणसाला माणूस समजत नाही. हा रुजणारा विचार कुठेतरी बाहेरच्या व्यावहारिक पातळीवर कामगार आणि रोबोट या सरस ठरणाऱ्या रोबोटबाबतही व्हायला लागला. मालक असलेला माणूस माणुसकीने वागत नसेल आणि त्याच वेळी रोबोट माणुसकीने वागू शकेल तर, अशा विचारांनी रोबोटमध्ये भावना रोपित करण्याविषयीच्या कथा यायला लागल्या. डॉक्टर अरुण मांडे सरांची डिसमॅन्टल ही कथा घरी काम करायला असलेल्या माणसांना बघून शिकणारा रोबोट. त्याला टप्प्याटप्प्याने होणारी ज्ञानेंद्रियांची ओळख, त्यातून निर्माण होणारी जाणीव, भावना, पण त्याच्या मानवी जाणीवांनी त्रासलेल्या माणूस असलेल्या मालकांनी मात्र त्याला कंपनीकडे परत देऊन नवीन रोबोट आणलेला असतो आणि त्याला कंपनी डिसमॅन्टल करते. या कथेत आपली सहानुभूती अर्थातच रोबोटकडे जाते. सुबोध जावडेकर सरांची हरवलेली बाहुली या कथेत टीव्हीलाचं म्हणजे रोबोटचं गतिमंद मुलीत गुंतणं, तो मेल्यावर एखाद्या रोबोटचं अशा रीतीने संतुलन ढळणं, तेही मैत्रीच्या भावनेने, ममत्वामुळे, आणि त्या मुलीच्या आईवडिलांनी मात्र आपल्या गतिमंद मुलीला कंटाळणं, यात मानवी कोण? निरंजन घाटे सरांच्या न उमटलेल्या भावना या कथेत एकमेकांना वेळ देऊ न शकणारं जोडपं वेगळ्या शहरात राहताना ते शेवटी शरीराची मनाची गरज म्हणून पर्याय निवडतात की आपल्या जोडीदारासारखे रोबोट बनवून घेतात रोजच्या आयुष्यासाठी. पण नंतर रोबोटमधली स्वामित्वाची भावना प्रभावी झालेली दिसून येते. रोबोट हेही मानवांसारखे प्रेम, राग, हेवे दावे, मत्सर, स्वामित्व, लोभ, मोह यात अडकतील, घुटाळतील. निरंजन घाटे सरांची व्यथा ही आणखी एक कथा. एक अतिशय हुशार संशोधक आपल्या पत्नीला झालेल्या रोगात तिचं सगळे अवयव बदलतो, फक्त मेंदू राहतो, ती जिवंत राहते, पण तिच्यासाठी ते जीवन अतिशय कठीण असतं, तो ते समजू शकत नाही. भावना रोपित केल्यावर रोबोट नाही असं होत असेल की त्यांनी जीवन बघितलंच नाही म्हणून कळणार नाही. सुबोध जावडेकर सरांच्या लढा या कथेत चंद्रावर एक यंत्रमानव दुसऱ्या यंत्रमानवाला नादुरुस्त करत होते. ते का? तर वेगवेगळ्या कंपनीचे असल्याने त्या कंपनीवाल्यांनी ते आपलं शत्रुत्व त्यांच्यात पेरलेलं दिसलं. कदाचित मत्सरही. स्त्री मत्सर वाढला तर तो फार भयंकर असू शकतो आणि रोबोट त्यांच्या नियमावली विरुद्ध असे वागायला लागले तर त्यांना अडवता येईल. रोबोट मदतीला असावा जरूर, पण मानवाने आपला प्रतिस्पर्धी आपणच तयार करावा का, यावर विचार करणं गरजेचं. सावधान मानवा, सावधान. धन्यवाद.
The title of my essay is Feminist Visions of Science and Utopia in Rokeya Shekhawat Hussein's Sultana's Dream. Where are the men? I asked her. In their proper places where they ought to be. We shut men indoors. Sitting in an easy chair, Sultana, an invented woman equivalent of Sultan, is thinking lazily of the condition of Indian womanhood when she falls asleep and wakes up in Ladyland. Welcomed by Sister Sarah, Sultana is taken on a tour of this revolutionary nation, a futuristic utopia founded on feminist science which seeks knowledge and peace rather than wealth and power. Well educated in science, history and politics, Sister Sarah was perhaps everything that Sultana hoped women in her home and nation would become. In her fictional Ladyland, a feminist revolution led by the scientific achievements and political cunning of the lady principal of an all-women university has already overthrown the men who ruled the nation. They seem to have invented water balloons which help them to draw as much water from the clouds as required. They also cooked with solar heat. The Queen of Ladyland made girls' education mandatory. Early marriage was banned. No woman was to be allowed to marry before she was 21. They had separate universities where men weren't allowed for obvious reasons. One of these universities invented a wonderful balloon to which they attached a number of pipes. By means of this captive balloon, which they managed to keep afloat above the cloud land, they could draw as much water from the atmosphere as they pleased. As the water was incessantly being drawn, no cloud gathered, and they stopped rain and storms thereby. The other university invented an instrument by which they could collect as much sun heat as they wanted, and they kept the heat stored up to be distributed among others as required. In Ladyland, under the leadership of Lady Principal, mosquito bites and disease epidemics are a thing of the past. Strenuous work is the chore of electric machines. Each street is the verdant garden, and laboratory work is completed in only 2 hours each day. Offering an alternative reality in which women are scientists in positions of power, Rokea's writing is ingrained in her broader ambitions to emancipate women in Bengali society. Sultana's dream is also Rokea's denunciation of imperialism's long-standing relationship with science. She says, "We do not covet other people's land. We do not fight for a piece of diamond. We dive deep into ocean of knowledge and try to find the precious gems which nature has kept in store for us." And Rokea's dreams did in part come true. In 1990, she founded the Shekhawat Memorial Girls' School, the first school in Bengal for Muslim women. And in 1916, she founded the Muslim Women's Society, which fought for women's education and employment. Rokeya was also one of the founders of the women's rights movement in Bengal, a movement that demonstrated how women were crucial to the political advancement of the nation and its liberation from colonial powers. Rokeya's witty and cutting indictment of Indian society and the men who rule it also depicts an alternative feminist science, one which better serves society. In her ideas, Rokeya was decades ahead of her time, critiquing not only the close relationship between science and patriarchy, but also the one between science and colonial power. Thank you.
Hello everyone. My name is Dr. Jyoti Venkatesh. I am the chairperson of Center for Global Languages, Bangalore City University. The title of my paper today is Cyrano de Bergerac, Father of Science Fiction Literature in France, a Reflection. At a time when the term science fiction was considered anachronistic for his time, Cyrano de Bergerac, French writer and libertine scientist of the 17th century, wrote The Other Worlds and Comical History of the States and Empires of the Moon and the Sun, a burlesque and fanciful novel published posthumously, where the theme of exploration of space arose a whole imagination linked to science fiction literature. In the line with the true history of the Greek writer Lucian, 2nd century, where the character travels to the moon, or the utopia of the humanist Thomas More, Cyrano's States and Empires is considered as a precursor text of science fiction literature in France. Connecting the place given in the text to scientific speculation, although it is generally fanciful, as well as to space travel, or even to the invention and the staging of built societies calling on a referent other than Earth's imagination, it would seem that States and Empires constitute a harbinger text of science fiction. The motive of space travel in the text does not necessarily carry the seeds of space opera, but rather constitute a process allowing the liberation of all speech to induce the multiplication of confrontations with otherness and the systematic expression of different points of view. This construction of a kaleidoscopic reality ultimately serves as a reflection on the margins and the relationships to the collective as well as to the norm. In this paper, we therefore examine the theme of space travel to try to understand its role in the work. Its crucial importance explains the establishment of several spatial devices in the text, which have different values. We will then be in a position to perceive why Cyrano de Bergerac is considered as the father of science fiction literature in France. The novel, divided into 2 volumes, first volume, The States and Empires of the Moon, published in 1657, 2 years after the death of Cyrano de Bergerac, talks about the protagonist named Cyrano, who attempts a space flight to the moon through an absurd method using bottles of dew. Later on, he takes a rocket. On his arrival at the Garden of Eden of the moon, he gives himself the chance to lampoon the Bible so severely that he is driven away. Though he soon encounters a race of giants, both big and small, along with the ghost of Socrates and Domingo Gonzalez from Francis Godwin's The Man in the Moon. He discusses with Domingo the uselessness of the idea of God. Throughout, the protagonist's understanding of the workings of the universe and other issues of natural philosophy are explicitly non-supernatural. However, the talks about immortality and the existence of the soul are also discussed. Then Cyrano is dumped back on Earth. In Volume 2, The States and Empires of the Sun, published in 1662, Cyrano escapes in a second flying machine driven by hot blasts of air generated by focused mirrors, which eventually deposit him on the sunspot, whose inhabitants explain the solar system to him in terms of something like the movement of atoms. It is clear that a plurality of worlds is discussed. He then descends to the sun itself, where he is tried for the crimes of humanity by a court of birds. A magpie known to him, however, saves him. He then meets Tommaso Campanella, an Italian philosopher of the late Renaissance, and they talk about sexuality in Utopia. At this point, the story, as published, ends abruptly, without any conclusion. Cyrano de Bergerac, through the description of a utopian society, criticizing the society of his time, shows how the narrator's story entertained the reader while imagining an ideal society founded on wisdom and happiness, but allowing to formulate a challenge to the society of his time. Travel in space generally supposes a technical crew, but becomes the privileged place of scientific reference. However, in States and Empires, the technology allowing the exploration of space is treated with an obvious humorous distance. Science is only a ceremonial tool here that serves as a varnish to the imagination, without which the will to anticipation or scientific rigor would be lacking. Thus, during his first attempt to reach the moon, the narrator uses a fanciful process of using vials of dew around him. These dewdrops are supposed to evaporate in the heat of the sun, but mistakenly falling back into Canada, the narrator is asked the following question: why have you divided your brandy into so many bottles? The means to space transport is therefore openly reduced to an accessory supporting comedy. Indeed, in Cyrano Bergerac, the hypothetical part of science is exacerbated to finally appear only as a starting point to the imagination. The first reservations to speculations of the mind are greeted at the beginning of the text with a why not, which is strikingly reminiscent of what if at the base of the astonishment, transformed into narration, which can be perceived as a defining criterion of science fiction. The theme of space travel, far from being support of a desire to anticipation, on the contrary, marks an ironic distance and exacerbates the artificial nature of the company. Space travel then appears as a narrative tool serving a purpose. In The State and Empires of the Sun, the character of Campanella, the Italian philosopher explorer of the sun, says, I quote, I spent my time visiting the climates of this great globe to discover its wonders. It is divided into kingdoms, republics, states, and principalities like the earth. Unquote. There is therefore no single spatial device nor the construction of a uniform otherness. Hence, it is fundamentally impossible for extracting from this multiplicity a clear message which would be attached to reality, to criticize or to enhance it. In fact, space travel is not intended to illustrate a message to provide truth. The new places of the moon and the sun offer a ground of expression to all the words, whether they are stereotypical, playful, fanciful, or that they are authoritative, while the terrestrial places are only suitable for a corseted world governed by the rules of convenience and quality. Space travel, therefore, makes it possible to free oneself from a real framework that is too rigid to make all voices heard without any particular imperative. The multiplicity of words uttered is added to the multiplicity of spatial devices on the moon and the sun. Each place offers a different relationship to time, otherness, and even to oneself as a body, and therefore offers a new reflection. We can distinguish, for example, the locus ammonius described at the beginning of the trip to the moon, which is explicitly related to the Garden of Eden. This insistence on the stereotypical aspect of the description as well as certain hyperbolic details like 1,000 little feathered voices make the forest resound with the sound of their songs, and the jiggling assembly of these melodious throats is so general that it seems that each leaf in the wood has taken the language and the face of a nightingale. This transforms this place into a non-place which would only be a sight of the mind. Space and the world are also constructed according to the gaze affixed on them. In The States and Empires of the Moon, a doctor asks the narrator, is it so hard to believe that a louse takes your body for a world? Similarly, all spatial devices are not on the same level of reality. In The States and Empires of the Sun, the passage dedicated to the description of the place called the Lake of Sleep is an allegory. 5 fountains represent the 5 senses and 3 rivers represent memory, imagination and judgment. The spatial place becomes a receptacle for a mental projection. It is believed the sun is also a place that also influences the human body. In States and Empires, one of the most enigmatic places is the luminous surface of the sun, which makes bodies translucent. The beings lose all opacity linked to the earth to merge into the air and be only the pure essence of itself. The metaphor of the body which incarnates on earth and disembodies itself by rising towards the sun is found here picturized. However, it is necessary to note that the philosophers who are considered the noblest souls of the sun do not merge in its matter, but keep their solidity. There is therefore a paradox because the total purity of the soul of the philosophers should be expressed by the fact that they can blend completely into the essence of the sun. Yet it is expressed here by their solid aspect and their attachment to the land, which results in opacity. The text also operates a systematic critique of any form of confinement, whether real or metamorphical. Metamorphical confinement in a suffered identity always leads to the victim character to real confinement. This is the case in the 2 mirrors trials in The State and Empires of the Moon, where the narrator is judged as a bird and locked up in a cage by men, and in The States and Empires of the Sun, where the narrator is judged as a man and locked up by the birds. At the same time, we note that beings who cross borders and provide passageways between worlds and between people are systematically enhanced. There are many figures of these passers. The demon of Socrates on the moon finds in Campanella his double on the sun as most remarkable. The story of the lover's tree told by the oaks of Dodona in the land of the sun points to the ambiguity because their fruits not only blindly produce love but also help in breaking the borders between beings, whether human, animal, and plant kingdoms, thus orchestrating transgression like zoophilia. The text also develops on several occasions the idea of one language understood by all. It is a leitmotif that very often emerges in the two trips. One finds one of the many descriptions of this language in an example when the narrator falls on the sun and meets a man and he says, he would talk to me for 3 hours in a language that I know I have never heard, and which has no relation with a single one of this world. However, I understood more quickly and more intelligibly than that of my nanny. This serves as a deeper ideal, that of merging the individual into the collective and making the unique plural. We find at the end of the States and Empires of the Moon praise of the cannibalism practiced in these regions. At the beginning of the Voyage of the Sun, the narrator also meets fruit men who merge into a single giant being. But it is in this incompleteness that the text ends. In the States and Empires of the Moon and the Sun already offer a much more complex and problematic relationship to space than in the extraordinary voyages of Jules Verne or the space opera of American pulps. Since everyone's Eden is another's hell, it is up to every traveler to find his true place, to find his mark in this world. Hence, where is that place for the hero narrator? Perhaps it's in his dreams. Perhaps that's why he left his story incomplete, thus letting the reader imagine this other world. To conclude, Cyrano's novel, apparently pleasant and picturesque, tackles very serious and daring subjects. He is one of the first French writers to describe an interplanetary journey utilizing rockets. He is a very sharp satirist, and his tale abounds with amusing attacks on religion, contemporary scientific theory, customs, philosophy, and more. Throughout the development, many small points are based on Cyrano's interpretation and extrapolation of the day. The book is thus science fiction of its period. He further opens the way by his strategy, his humor, and his fantasy, not only to the philosophical tale of the 18th century like Candide by Voltaire and Gulliver's Travel by Jonathan Swift, but also to the science fiction novels of the 19th century like that of Jules Verne and others. Thank you very much for your attention. I would also take this opportunity to thank the organizers of this 5th International Science Fiction Conference and for giving us the opportunity to attend such a wonderful conference. Thank you very much.
Hi, the title of my paper is A Journey Through the Forbidden Country, the Representation of Gender in Manjula Padmanabhan's The Island of Lost Girls. Despite populist notions of the overwhelmingly masculine nature of science fiction, the problematic spaces signaled by gender are crucial to science fiction imaginings. In the Indian context too, contemporary women science fiction writers such as Vandana Singh, Manjula Padmanabhan, Sadhana Shankar, etc. are radically subverting accepted notions of gender. Do our women writers look at gender as something other than a fixed binary code Do they create genderless or gender fluid societies in their futuristic worlds? The present paper explores these questions about gender in one of the significant contemporary science fiction, The Island of Lost Girls, published in 2015 by Manjula Padmanabhan. The journey of Meiji, the only woman survivor in a dystopia characterized by misogyny, violence, surveillance, and environmental degradation, provides an interesting study of gender polarities. The Island of Lost Girls, like its prequel Escape, published in 2008, possesses the potential to destabilize gender with a whole gamut of trans people, feminist island, the forbidden country, subhuman drones in servitude, and cloned men celebrating violent masculinity. Despite the gender complexity in the lead characters, the novel struggles to break away from the binary construct of gender and the biological determinism of the same. The reason being, the paper argues, the gender dystopia that Padmanabhan constructs, stretching gender violation of contemporary times to its exaggerated limits. As Alexandra Alter observes, there is a, I quote, growing wave of female centered dystopian fiction, futuristic works that raise uncomfortable questions about pervasive gender inequality, misogyny, and violence against women, the erosion of reproductive rights, and the extreme consequence of institutionalized sexism. Unquote. Although she makes this observation in the Western context, it is true of Indian scenario too. The Island of Lost Girls presents a contrast between two extremes: one, the forbidden land of sheer brutality, and another, the island of women, which stands for horrifying discipline and uniformity. It's a world of vengeance and sexual deprivation. While the authorities in the Forbidden Land control their dystopia by slaughtering women and by punishing any feminine disposition, those who are in charge on the island imprison women in restricted spaces first, erase their memories, limit their vocabulary, deprive them of their freedom, and impose maternity or sexuality upon them. Yet, the novel is not just about men and women, but also about trans people. The paper examines three characters: Meiji, youngest, Alia, through whom the spectrum of gender dystopia is represented. However, for the presentation here, I am focusing on only one character. Meiji belongs to the complex landscape of Forbidden Country, which is ruled by the generals who, after accessing the reproductive technology of cloning, have slaughtered women. Referring to themselves as clone brothers, these generals speak of women as vermin, filth, and scum. From this misogynist dystopia, youngest and his daughter Meiji have to escape before the generals catch wind of Meiji's existence so that they can't murder her and punish her family. The novel begins with their journey to a safe island outside Forbidden Country where women are protected. Interestingly, Meiji is chemically kept in a prepubescent stasis and her female body is hidden under a prosthetic male genital. She grows up among men, her uncles, with a body outwardly like a man's but inwardly that of a woman. The psychological trauma resulting from such a violation of body, even if it is for protection, is the consequence of intense hatred towards women. Meiji has lived in an enclosed world and she has no context for what it means to be female or feminine in this world or what the words even mean. The Forbidden Country represents extreme patriarchy where femininity is penalized and feminine behaviors are stigmatized. When Meiji is taken out of this world to an island where she is forced to confront women and their naked bodies, she doesn't have the language for it. So she calls herself monster because monsters don't fit in, monsters are supposed to be killed off. On the island, when Meiji is asked to disrobe, I quote, to let go of patriarchal shame, unquote, and to see a life birth, She literally cannot stand it, having grown up among only men and seeing only male bodies. Meiji cannot reconcile the reality of her body with the one she has grown up understanding as normal, even on an island populated only by cisgender women who are extremely comfortable in their skin. The island women present another extreme in erasing Meiji's memories without her consent of toxic patriarchy from the forbidden land so as not to contaminate the minds of other women on the island. The women leaders of the island, mentors as they are called, despite pronouncing themselves as feminist, display hegemonic control over battered women who seek shelter on the island. The novel problematizes Meiji's understanding of her gender through discussions on Meiji's sexed but non-gendered selfhood. Meiji expresses a distinct selfhood which is neither he nor she. It's not constrained by the same ideologies of performing a specific gender as those expressed by the island women or youngest. As she traverses new contexts and makes her own choices, the revelations her body offers to herself and to others is interesting as well as daunting. Given that Meiji considers herself as male or aligned with masculinity, it is possible to read Meiji as a trans man. The novel bypasses a significant opportunity to complicate gender binary in implying Meiji's possible growth towards cis womanhood rather an acceptance of a possible male identity. This is so because even the so-called feminist island, there is no understanding of women who have transmasculine self. However, there is enough within the narrative to posit that Meiji could be read as non-binary or as a trans man. The dysphoric experiences of a trans masculine is not explored in the character of Meiji, who is artificially fitted with a different genitalia. The fact that Meiji associates safety and comfort with the synthetic organ against her female body opens up a plethora of psychological disorientation. What problematizes trans readings of Meiji's condition is a consistent appropriation, consciously or unconsciously, of trans people's experiences to suit a cis-sexist narrative along the lines of the gender dystopia. The repeated affirmation that gender is inherently linked to one's genitals and cis bodies, any alteration in them from a cis normative model is considered deplorable. Although a problematic one, any alienation in them, sorry, although a problematic one, the novel opens up the possibility for Meiji to be read as transmasculine. When Meiji chooses to cast aside her protective armor in exchange with recovering her memories of the past, it points to a readjustment of her selfhood, which is depicted till that point in the plot as more transmasculine or non-gendered. The notion of gender Meiji arrives at after recovering her memories from the forbidden country would have been better if presented with a dynamic understanding of the coming out process. The text, however, undermines the possibility of presenting gender queerness by referring to Meiji as her from the beginning, even though Meiji does not relate to the gender signified by her. Since Meiji's femininity has been repressed for several years, representing her as a trans male protagonist would have been significant. However, since the text is oriented towards rigid gender binaries and cis-normative model of gender, Meiji's suffering as a trans man caught in an all-women world is or caught in an all-men world is left to the reader's understanding. If Padmanabhan writes a utopian sequel to The Island of Lost Girls, perhaps there is a possibility of exploring the developmental stages of self-discovery in Meiji, for the novel ends with Meiji resisting the island women's attempts to have control over her mind. Thank you.
This has been a deeply enriching and illuminating session which showcases a wide spectrum of issues pertaining to women and science fiction, feminist underpinnings of science fiction, and also the paper presenters have made a laudatory attempt to showcase some of the exciting voices of women writers from contemporary science fictional scenario today. I congratulate all the speakers for a very illuminating session. Dr. Navli Balaji's paper, Female Characters in Science Fiction, Archetypal Messengers of Social Equity and Equality, talks about the ostensibly male supremacist nature of science fiction. He contends that although science fiction appears to be male-centered, despite the preponderance of women writers attempting this genre and who have explored it in very imaginative, interesting ways, somehow it is undesirable that science fiction is perceived to be a male-centered genre. So he says the presences of women, the discourses of feminism and feminist interventions have enriched this genre so much that the women writers here in contemporary science fictional arena have actually transcended the shorelines of feminism and science fiction and have gone on to provide a very vital and much needed and a salutary humane perspective. They have, in fact, he says that science fiction, as it is normatively understood as very male supremacist, has, of course, leaned towards looking at science as a discourse of, well, progress, of course, but then also hegemony, violence, and greed. And feminist interventions have proved to be a corrective aimed at bringing in and ushering in a compassionate, humane dimension, a pacifist dimension also to this territory. So in this context, he discusses some of the exciting writers that we have in our midst today, like Octavia Butler, and also in the context of the Indian subcontinent, he analyzes an interesting anthology of 19 short stories taken from Indian languages, anthology edited by Bal Phondke, titled A Collection of 19 Selected Science Fiction Stories from Various Indian Languages, and he goes on to contend that these discourses of feminism and the feminist writers have, and also the female characters in such fictional works have helped us and perhaps have facilitated our understanding of these writers and characters as archetypal messengers of social equity. In fact, these writers, according to him, do not tread the grounds of mutual exclusivism, but of creative complementarity. And this is a much needed perspective. Dr. Nidhi Mishra's paper, Exploring the Gamut of African American Women's Science Fiction. Dr. Nidhi Mishra contends that the COVID-19 pandemic has rekindled our interest in the genre of science fiction, not only science fiction, but also utopian and dystopian and also post-apocalyptic fantasy fiction, which is closely allied with science fiction. In this context, she throws light on a rather unexplored territory, contemporary African American women's science fiction, how these women delve into issues of racism and look at futurism and this futuristic perspective from the racial point of view. So she discusses writers like Octavia Butler and Tanarari Yu. And the African women writers have impeccably, according to her, blended realism with fantasy and spirituality with science. And these are very relevant because they are also narratives of African American women's emancipation. And then we have a joint presentation by Kevin Moley and Dr. C.G. Sangeeta titled Delineation of Optimistic Women in the Calculating Stars. Calculating Stars is a novel by Mary Robinette Kowal where the writers contend that this is an example of a science fictional work, a feminist science fictional work, which visualizes its fictional protagonist as a superheroine and as an empowered subject. So you have a lady astronaut who is brought center stage in this particular novel. So they contend that very affirmative vignettes and portraits of empowered women are showcased in this novel. Breaking the myth, women as superheroines and supervillains in a dystopian world is yet another paper in this direction presented by Miss Nabanita Deka, who also argues that feminist science fiction provides an alternative realm altogether for serving. It almost empowers you as a heuristic tool to explore the multiplicitous notions of gynocentric identity. Gynocentric identity for her is not a unilinear, unidirectional identity. It has several ramifications, and she explores it with respect to a novel titled The Many Lives of Ruby Iyer, that is Lakshmi Hariharan's novel. And where she also discusses how these alternative methods of reproduction ultimately lead to a dystopian world order. And then we have Rajni Ravindra's paper on Sultana's Dream and its conception of feminist utopia. Rajni Ravindra discusses the work of Ruqayya Shekhawat Hussain, a feminist thinker who published this short story as early as in 1905, who could be actually understood as a forerunner of feminist science fiction. It easily can be hailed as a precursor text of our contemporary feminist science fiction era today. Even before, what is interesting is particularly before the upsurgence of the first wave and the second wave feminist movements, here in 1905, Ruqayya Shekhawat Hussain imagines a conflict-free Herland, much before Charlotte Perkins Gilman attempted to do it in her classic fantasy fiction called Herland. So the paper seeks to shed light on Ruqayya Begum's liberal thoughts, her utopian feminist vision, and her secular outlook and her literary genius. It aims to celebrate Ruqayya Begum and as the harbinger of Muslim women's emancipation and awakening. Then we have Dr. Shobha's paper, A Journey Through the Forbidden Country, Representation of Gender in Manjula Padmanabhan's The Island of Lost Girls. Dr. Shobha argues that the genre of feminist science fiction has provided a fertile environment for a very radical exploration of socio-cultural understandings of gender. In fact, this is the arena, she contends, where writers have gone on to successfully challenge our default assumptions about gender. She names a few like Ursula Le Guin, Joanna Russ, Melissa Scott and others. But what adds to the credit of this paper is that Dr. Shobha attempts a detailed analysis in the contemporary Indian context and discusses some of the exciting feminist writers in contemporary science fiction today from the Indian subcontinent. To name a few, Vandana Singh, Manjula Padmanabhan and Sadhana Shankar. Here she particularly picks up Manjula Padmanabhan's interesting dystopian novel, The Island of Lost Girls, which was published as recently as in 2015, where the journey of the female protagonist, Meiji, the only woman survivor in a dystopia that's characterized by brutalizing women and misogyny and violence and surveillance and environmental degradation. It provides a very interesting study of gender polarities, gender politics and contemporary science fiction. Then we also have a paper titled Portraiture of Women, Robots and Robotic Behavior in Marathi Science Fiction by a contemporary Marathi science fiction writer, Smita Potnis. Smita Potnis raises an interesting question here about robots and female robots. She also speculates, what if robots come with human emotions? What if they are engineered, and if there is a technological advancement to make robots sentient, what kind of consequences would it have for our own civilization? Would there be some kind of a competitive, would there be some kind of a competitive, fierce kind of struggle between the creators and the created, and what kind of implications it would have for us as a society? We also have a paper from French Literary Studies by Dr. Jyoti Venkatesh, who has attempted an interesting historical survey of science fiction in French literature and explores one of the seminal texts which is considered to be a forerunner or a precursor text of science fiction, namely Cyrano de Bergerac, the libertine scientist of 17th century France, and his radical utopian science fictional work titled The Other World, or Comical History of the The Other World, or Comical History of the States and Empires of the Moon and the Sun. This is a very interesting satirical commentary on our own contemporary socio-cultural milieu. So the presenters have given us indeed a spectacular fare and showcased before us many of the burning issues which are very relevant and pertinent to our contemporary socio-cultural world. And it's an interesting intervention into the genre of science fiction. Thank you.